Welcome to The Explainer. Tonight we're diving into a single dark night in a garden. It's a story from the Gospel of Mark, and it's all about betrayal, anger, and fear. We're going to explore how, in one critical moment, everyone left, and what that shows us about human nature and about the one person who chose to stay. But first, let's think about something we all know, the handshake. For centuries, the whole point of it was to show, hey, I don't have a weapon in my hand, I mean you no harm. It's this beautiful, simple promise of peace and trust. But modern psychology has a name for a darker version of this. It's called the false handshake. That's when someone gives you a big smile and a warm hand, but underneath, it's all a strategy. They're just trying to use your kindness for their own benefit, and they're ready to drop your hand the second you're no longer useful to them. And this can lead to a really shocking kind of human behavior. You see, when we receive tons of kindness, but our own selfish expectations aren't being met, something can twist inside of us. That gratitude can morph into this sense of entitlement, where we feel like we actually have the right to betray the very person who was so gracious to us. And that idea, well, that brings us right into the Garden of Gethsemane. On a pitch-black night, we meet our first character, Judas Iscariot, who took that false handshake and turned it into an act of betrayal that changed the world. So Jesus has just finished praying, and suddenly the quiet of the night is just shattered. Judas, one of his 12 closest friends, shows up. And he's not alone. He's leading this armed mob sent by the top religious leaders. And they're carrying clubs and daggers. This looks more like a lynch mob than an official arrest. Judas walks straight up to Jesus, his teacher, and he greets him with a seemingly friendly rabbi. And then he kisses him. Now, in that culture, a kiss was a sign of deep affection and respect a student would give to his master. But this gesture wasn't about love. It was a prearranged, cold-blooded signal. He had already told the mob, the one I kiss, that's the man. Arrest him. He twisted this beautiful symbol of fellowship into a destructive tool of betrayal. And if you dig into the original Greek that Mark uses here, it gets even more chilling. The word isn't just a simple kiss, it's kataphilio, which means to kiss excessively, over and over, like he was clinging to him. This wasn't a quick peck. It was an over-the-top, grotesque display that turned intimacy into a signal for death. So you have to ask, why? Why would he do this? Well, it seems his whole belief system had just collapsed. Judas was probably expecting a political, military messiah who was going to overthrow Rome. When he finally realized Jesus was choosing the path of the cross, the path of suffering and death, his teacher suddenly became a roadblock to his own ambition. All that grace he'd received for 3 years was repaid with a kiss of betrayal. Okay, so as the guards are grabbing Jesus, another disciple reacts, but his failure looks totally different. It's not a calculated betrayal, it's this impulsive, raw human anger. And this brings us to our next character, Peter. While Judas used a kiss, another disciple, and we're pretty sure from the other Gospels that this is Peter, he pulls out a literal sword. He saw what he thought was an injustice, and he reacted with force. His way was the sword of anger, of human violence, trying to stop God's plan. But Jesus' way? That was the path of the cross, of divine obedience, of actually fulfilling God's plan. Now, Peter's action was actually more specific than just a wild swing in the dark. According to the law in the book of Leviticus, a priest who had any kind of physical blemish, like, say, a severed ear, was disqualified from ever serving in the temple again. And this guy, Malchus, was the high priest's personal servant. So Peter might have been trying to permanently cripple him, a deliberate act of revenge, basically saying, you'll never serve that high priest again. And Jesus just shuts it down right then and there. He rebukes Peter, making it absolutely clear that human anger and our own violent efforts can never accomplish God's will. And then, in this unbelievable act of grace, Jesus touches the servant's ear and heals him, saving his enemy from a lifetime of shame. All right, so we've seen calculated betrayal and we've seen misguided anger. But through it all, Jesus is completely in control, saying that all of this is happening just to fulfill the scriptures. And it's right at this moment that the third, and maybe the most relatable, human failure happens. This line, man, it has to be one of the most tragic sentences in the entire story. Then everyone deserted him and fled. Not just one or two, everyone. The very same men who had just promised they would die for him were gone, just scattered into the darkness. That's right, 0. Of
all the people who had walked with him for 3 years, who saw his miracles, who heard his teaching, not a single one stayed. Fear completely took over.
And then Mark's gospel throws in this really strange, kind of embarrassing detail you won't find anywhere else. A young man, whom most people think was probably Mark himself, was following along. And when the guards grab him, he squirms right out of his only piece of clothing, a linen cloth, and runs away completely naked. This might seem like a random detail, but it's this powerful metaphor for our own resolve, isn't it? We wrap ourselves up in what we think is strong faith and dignity, but in a real crisis, when true fear grabs hold of us, all of that can be stripped away in an instant, leaving us feeling exposed and ashamed.
So, in the middle of this catastrophic human failure, betrayal, anger, fear, one person stands firm. One person did not run.
You have to understand, Jesus' arrest was not a helpless defeat. Far from it. He had the power to call down legions of angels to just wipe out that mob, but he chose not to. He willingly held out his hands to be tied. This wasn't passive acceptance. This was active obedience, a deliberate, conscious choice to walk the path his Father had set out to fulfill the plan of salvation.
Okay, so what do we do with all this? What's the takeaway from these 3 portraits of human failure? Well, they're meant to be like spiritual mirrors, showing us our own potential weakness.
Think about it. Judas reflects that part of us that might try to use our faith as a tool to get what we want. Peter reflects our own zeal when it's not guided by prayer, our tendency to pull out the sword of anger and try to force God's will our own way. And that young man, well, he reflects our raw human weakness, our impulse to run for it when following Jesus gets really, really costly. But this right here is the most important part of the whole story. Jesus walked this lonely path, knowing full well about all these failures, not to judge them, but to provide a grace that is bigger than all of them. The cross isn't a monument to our failure, it's the solution for it. And this leaves all of us with a final, piercing question. When we see our own reflection in Judas, or in Peter, or in that young man, when we fail, do we pull away in shame and hide in the darkness, or do we turn back to the very one who walked toward the cross, specifically to meet us in that failure, with a grace that covers all of it?